Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast, career advice from people in the business. This week, I'm speaking to Visual Effects Supervisor Christian Manz. Christian has worked on big budget movies like Dracula, Untold, Nanny McPhee. He's been Bafta nominated for his work on all three Fantastic Beasts movies, and Oscar nominated for his work on the Harry Potter movies. I asked Christian about what it was like working on big budget movies, all the challenges he faced. We talked about the iconic opening credit sequence for Doctor Who that he worked on, and he gave me some advice for people wanting to enter the industry on how to get a career in visual effects. Enjoy. So you're a visual effects supervisor. Can you tell me what movies inspired you to work in visual effects?
It was movies and TV, to be honest. I think obviously the big one would be, of somebody of my age, would be Star Wars.
Yeah.
You know, the first Star Wars film. I only saw that on TV the first time. I think actually, but seeing that Star Destroyer go over and not quite sort of being sucked into that world, and that time, obviously, when I was watching it, not having a clue that it all wasn't real, etc., etc. But through films like that, and then on TV, for me, it was the original incarnation of Doctor Who as well. So that was kind of like, so both of those things, I kind of think, kind of got me interested in film and television as a whole, really, I guess, rather than specifically just in the VFX.
Yeah. And how did you start off? Did you go to uni to study it? What was your sort of path into visual effects?
I studied illustration at university.
Oh, okay.
So I had no as I was growing up, I kind of got more and more of an interest in TV, particularly, and film, wanting to do maybe title sequences. I wanted to be a cameraman at one point. I think all these different things, but I never really had a path in. My dad worked for London Underground, so I wasn't somebody who grew up in that world. So it's when I went to university. I went to Kingston University, and one of my tutors there, Christine Butler, was a BBC graphic designer, and it was during doing the animation module with her. I was terrible at animation, so I didn't continue it on. But through her, I suddenly was like, oh right, there's this. Just hearing what she did as a job, which was title sequences, and also my dissertation at the time. I managed to wheedle in my Doctor Who thing, so I did the visual effects of Doctor Who as my dissertation. So there, I was interviewing all the people who'd done the titles, the visual effects and sets. And in my third year, as a sort of a day of experience, we went with Christine to this place called Framestore, where he worked a lot, and we sat in a suite and watched her working with with Timo, who still works at Framestore now, the Henry operator, and I was like, oh wow, this looks cool. I wonder. And it was when I finished uni, I had my portfolio to do my illustration stuff, but I said to her, how would I get into doing something like that? And it was being a runner. So I put my CV around Soho and got a job 27 years ago nearly as a runner at Framestore.
Wow. So you've been at that company a long time, and that's interesting that you started as a runner. I had no idea. I thought maybe you'd have learnt the visual effects and then got gigs working on.
Oh, back then there weren't
shows.
really those sort of courses. So it was that Ravensbourne at the time had a Henry, which was the high end sort of visual effects workstation editing software back then, but there weren't really the courses that there are now. So yeah, I came and I couldn't switch on a computer. I mean, I'd done like a 2-day Photoshop course on my illustration degree, and that was it.
Yeah, wowzers. Okay, so then thinking about people now, they can do the courses. And I noticed on Framestore you have internships and work experience, that kind of stuff. So what would you recommend people do to get into this business?
I think if you want to get into visual effects, I think it is now best to go and do a degree, a course that gets you that sort of grounded knowledge of, what visual effects is, what you might want to do, because visual effects has lots and lots and lots of different job types. So and I think my biggest thing I say to students now when I've looked at reels is to specialize as much as you can, because we do have people who are generalists, and we love generalists. And that when I started, people did a bit of this, a bit of that, but now your jobs are a lot more focused into certain job types. You're an animator, you're a modeler, you're a compositor. So I think to get a job at the end, you really do need to have a reel that shows a specific skill that you do well. And it's not about showing 100 things that you've done. It's about showing the 2 things that you're really proud of that really show that you're aiming at that job. Because it's, when I went into it, I ended up jumping around a little bit in terms of what I did do, and found my way to what I'm being a VFX supervisor now, but it wasn't a linear route. But the industry's a lot bigger than it was when Frame Store was 70 people when I started, and it's thousands of people now. So, but I think it to be show, and it's also thinking outside the box a bit. You want to do your work you're doing for your course, but often now you get the opportunity, like on the internship at Frame Store, you get the opportunity to be a part of making a little film or something like that. And I think you get noticed more, I guess, if you've done something that's an interesting idea, or wow, it's all about making sure you do something well rather than lots of bits sort of well.
Yeah. And is there in that all of those different roles of visual effects, is there any particular roles that are more in demand that people are sort of looking for and that there are more opportunities in?
I think it's in everything. I mean, animation is a massive growing thing. The amount of projects now that demand animation is growing and growing all the time, in streaming and in film. So that's one of them. But there's lots of, it's a broad church, and we also have all of the people who are, in our systems department, people who are writing the software. There's obviously new things like AI uses of that, and but there's lots and lots and lots of aspects to it. So I think as long as you're keen and focused, I think there's lots of opportunities in all of the avenues really that you'd want to go down.
Yeah, and can you explain what you do as visual effects supervisor? What does that role include?
Well, as a visual effects supervisor, so now I act because I work outside of Frame Store most of the time. Like now, I'm on a film. I'm in Soho, not a Frame Store. So I work directly for the studio on a movie. So I'm working as one of the filmmakers directly with the director, the producers, and I'll start on the movie. I'm usually one of the first on, and one of the last off as well. So I'm starting with my producer. We have a script. You're breaking down what the work could be in that script, and then you're beginning the early, like using the Fantastic Beasts films as a an example. There, the journey of those films was coming up with the designs of the creatures, so working with concept artists, and then bringing animators and modelers in to start working with an animation team and supervisor, designing the characters very early on, months and months before production starts. And then alongside that, you, as the art department building up, you're beginning to work out what the world's going to be, working out so there's a whole creative thing to start with, and then there's the how are we going to do this, and so there's a lot of logistics to working out, especially with sets, what's going to be real, what's going to be CG, what's going to be completely CG. You begin to work out who you want to do the work. So the current film I'm doing now is all Frame Store mostly, but Fantastic Beasts, we had about 7 companies in the end on that. So you're working out how you want to break the work up, briefing them, getting costs from them so that my producers can work out whether it fits our budget. Creativity, still working on pre-vis, which is a big part of it. So that's pre-visualization. So we kind of do a simple animated version of all of the kind of key sort of action sequences or set piece sequences in the film, so that we know what we're going to film, because a lot of stuff isn't there. So creatures or flying carriages or all that sort of stuff. We have to design all of that, so that, and alongside that, doing all the head of departments meetings. I mean, visual effects is the reason I really enjoy my job mostly is because it sits in the middle of everything. You're doing a digital version of most of everybody else's department, so you have to work with everybody from your production designer to your stunt coordinator to your costume designer, makeup designer, obviously the director, the everybody. You are making digital versions of virtually everything they're doing, and so a lot of the meetings towards shoot are all about prepping for the shoot, but also working out how we'll integrate into that what we'll be doing. Then on the shoot itself, I'm there every single day on set. Usually stood next to the director, sort of making sure that I'll have a team of people on set, my team in the office, but a team of people on set taking all of our set data to make sure we've got everything we need to recreate or put a creature into a shot or a background. And I'm there often again with the director, sort of creatively, sort of like, oh, does this work? Does that work? Or speaking with them, the actors, everybody, the director of photography, to make sure we're attaining that. And then like now, we're finally in post production, and that's where we're working with initially to we're as I am now, I'm with the editor and director. We're in offices all together. So as the film is being cut together, we're beginning to put simple versions of the visual effects in initially, and then we'll be working with whoever's doing the final visual effects to put all of those in. And then my job is to make sure all of the director's notes are being sort of adhered to. Creatively, it's going in the right direction. The quality is correct. And that builds looking at every single shot in the film, which usually is about, on the films I do, is about 1,500 shots, something like that, to a final delivery, and then seeing the final film. So it's the process is anything from 18 months or more recently to about 3 years.
Wow.
So it's a long one, but you feel, I think creatively it's the most rewarding my job has been, because you are really, say you are part of making the movie.
It sounds like you're chatting to every single department and responsible. You've got a lot on your shoulders as far as the final kind of look and feel of the film comes through. So talking about like Harry Potter, big films like Fantastic Beasts, what wouldn't a normal what wouldn't a student appreciate about a film of that size, do you think?
I think it is the sheer amount of people, the amount of collaboration. Collaboration is really key. And just the minutiae that you go down to in terms of detail. And we're going through all of that detail in pre-production, but then at the end, you've got people like a frame store you'll have an individual person looking at one thing in one shot, and I've got to stand back from that and look at the broad thing. Does it fit? But it's there's when I was doing more in-house supervision or working as an artist on shots, you'd realise that something that you had worked on for months, it's almost like that. Look down at your popcorn, look up, and it's gone. And you'd be like, oh, wow, all of that work. But I think that's the biggest shock, I think, to people, is the amount of detail and hard work from all of the film crew. By the time filming is finished, that feels like, even though we carry on, obviously, feels like a massive achievement, because you've attained all of that work and all of that detail that's gone into sets and costumes and makeup and the photography and the lighting and all of that. And then we then have the responsibility of making sure that we make our stuff look as good as their stuff did, So I think that's the scale of it, I think, would be quite surprising, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier you did your dissertation on Doctor Who, but then later on you got to actually do Doctor Who credit sequence. So that must have blown your mind for starters. What do you get given? So say they say, right, we're going to do the credit sequence. Are they telling you? Do you know the whole story of that show so that it informs it? I'm talking to Doctor Who in particular, because the one I saw that you did is quite dark and sort of scary compared to some of the other ones. So did you know the whole story, what was going to happen, and how much did they define what that looked like?
we did that in 2 weeks.
Oh, right.
So we, yes, you're right. It was like, because I'd spoken to all of the original titles designers doing my dissertation, and then suddenly I found myself when I was doing a film at the time, and my producer said, "Oh, the BBC are being in contact. They need a title sequence for Doctor Who. Do you think?" And I was like, "Yes. Where can we? How can we make that work?" And the brief I had was they wanted it to feel at the time it was the Matt Smith coming in, Stephen Moffat coming in, that they actually wanted, bizarrely, although that's what I was doing at the time, more of a sort of a Harry Potter sort of darker feel to the title sequence to the show. So that was the brief. So I literally went over, they sent me the music, and I went over a weekend and I wrote a treatment and did some really thumbnail sort of storyboards and wrote a timing thing for it, and came in on the Monday and did the meeting, say this is what I think we're going to do. They were like, great, and then we began work. So and then we did the usual thing of doing a simple previs version of it, and then working up, and literally that was the last thing I think, because I didn't use Nuke at all, but I sat there with the manual next to a and like three of us with a team working in Iceland at the frame store. I had a team in Iceland at the time, and doing the sort of the animation, the CG aspects of it, and then a lot of it was just comp heavy, making it look good. And I handed the HD tape to the bike courier, who then took it to Cardiff to cut on the front of the show, and it went out the next night. So
Wow,
it was pretty full on, and we did do tweaks as those series. We had to change names, and we got the opportunity to kind of do a slightly more refined version as it went on. But I'm still really proud of it, and I must admit, my son turned to me with the new series that's been on recently, and he said, "Oh, the kind of look of the colours of that, they're kind of copying your one, aren't they?" And I was like, maybe they are. I don't know. But it's nice to have been that, because I know as a fan at the time, I knew the sort of like the Bernard Lodge titles or the Sid Sutton titles. So it's quite nice to be in that. That title sequence will always be mine, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And then looking at Harry Potter, so I read on somewhere that you were involved with Dobby, the character Dobby. How did that work? Was that motion capture, or was that a cardboard thing that you replaced on set? And how involved with the actor were you with the visual effects team?
Well, so at that point, that was my last job I did as an in-house visual effects supervisor for Frame Store. So we had zero contact with the set or the, Tim Burke, who I ended up collaborating with on the Fantastic Beasts film, was the supervisor on the movie. And so very much that work came to us initially as we did a test to show that we were, because again, doing that sort of CG human-ish character was still is tough, but was tough. So we had to do a test. So myself with Andy Kind, who I'm working with now again, he was the CG supervisor, and Pablo Grillo, who I've worked with a lot as was the animation supervisor, and we did a test to show that it was Dobby sat at a writing desk, to show that when we got awarded the work. And then because they were filming those two films, Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2, I think the shoot was nearly a year. So we had a lot of time on film 1 in the background to be building him and Creature. So we had, but what was great about the way it was shot was it was all keyframe animation. There was no capture at all. Creature was done slightly differently because the actor was actually in the set he was down just in his own clothes, but crouched down and actually in the shots with them. And so we were so he was in the lighting and everything, and we had, we painted him out and stuck him back in, and so that was brilliant. So we had all of that reference for him, because we had the actor playing him in set. Dobby, Toby Jones had done a kind of recording, but that was also filmed. So we had reference. The animators had reference there. So really, it was a journey with him. That was the first thing where, because back in those days, you used to get a designed thing would get sent to you like the mermaids. I always remember in Harry Potter 4, they turned up at Frame Store as a beautiful sculpt that would be scanned, and then the job initially was to build that thing.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing with Dobby. There had been a beautiful sculpt made of him. The brief from David Yates was he wanted him to just feel more real, more, I guess, because we were effectively killing him.
Mm.
He wanted to engage with him more than I think the film Chamber of Secrets. Dobby was slightly more kind of exaggerated in character and look, and David is always about paring it down in reality a bit. So we were seeing what we could do design wise with him to pull him into something that felt more proportionate and a little bit, even though he still had the big ears and eyes and all that sort of stuff. And Creature, we had a bit more license to change him. So it was a real journey of, instead of having that defined thing to start with, the journey of 15 months on that was remodeling, doing animation, going, oh, maybe we need to tweak his proportions, and doing all of that all the way down to delivery virtually. And it was really beautiful work. It was it still stands up today, and I think I knew at the time, we all knew at the time, the fact that we got 15 months to work on 100 shots of a film. That just doesn't happen now. You'd never get that time. But I was kind of half finishing Nanny McPhee at the same time that was starting. But yeah, that focus, that's the focus on the craft was the great thing there, and we had lots of great references. But yeah, all keyframe animation.
Wowzers!
Not capture.
And it worked because people cared when he died. That's the main thing.
Yes,
it really worked.
Yeah.
Because that could have gone horribly wrong. So talking about when you're watching films these days, is there anything you see in visual effects that makes you cringe and go, oh, when they do that, I don't like it? Or is this, or do you spot a lot of mistakes? How do you view other films?
I tend to, in truth, try and just watch films as a viewer, and I don't sit. Yes, you do see stuff that you think, oh, I wish that. Often, if the story and the story's good enough and the performances of everybody in it's good enough, if the visual effects aren't quite up to scratch, you forgive it. I think it's when the story isn't good enough and everything else isn't good enough, and it's leaning on the visual effects, and they're not good enough either, that then suddenly it's like, oh, the visual effects were terrible, weren't they? It's like, but it wasn't them that was letting the movie. I as a truth, I think, but it's really the aim of visual effects, even if you are doing fantasy creatures or is that you shouldn't even be looking at them. You shouldn't even feel aware that something's happened. You should feel that creature was filmed with those actors and all that sort of thing. And I think a lot of time now that you see something that isn't up to scratch, I know that it's because most probably they didn't have enough time, or that changes were made, because we're in a digital world where we can do everything. I always say you can do anything. It doesn't mean we should, but I think the ability to change stuff is people feel it's easy and therefore it happens, but often changes are made too late in the day to make it to that final look that you would expect from everything else. And that's really tough, because everybody on a production, whatever it is, always wants to do their best work, and sometimes it just stops. The deadline's there, the film's got to be out, and you don't get the opportunity, and you kind of, and there's always shots in things that you've done that you're like, oh, I wish we had more time to do that. But yeah, I think because visual effects as well, it's also the art of, it is a visual effect. It's not reality. You've got to try and guide the audience's eye to the thing that they should be looking at. And if something in the top right hand corner isn't doing quite the right thing, it doesn't matter. And I think often my job, as you go through the finishing stage, is to make sure that we're focusing on the right stuff. So you're working with the director and trying to help, with the director, because obviously we all want it to look great, but if we haven't got enough time, we've just got to focus on the right stuff to make sure that when you watch it in the edit, you don't really notice the things that aren't Right.
Yeah. So with that in mind, if I could say to you, is there an old TV show? I'm not trying to steer you to Doctor Who, but is there a film or a TV show from the past that you would love to go back and work on the effects and kind of update them?
Oh wow, that's kind of a well, you see it done quite a lot, and actually, I guess there are obviously Doctor Who episodes that I'd love to, and you do see it these days where there are special editions done with updating. I think Doctor Who's done it, Star Trek's done it, but even then, you're like, it's still not been done with the full money and time that it would
Mm.
take. So there's certainly aspects of some of those shows. I always, there are other shows that I grew up with. There was a show called the Tripods, which I loved when I was a kid, and stuff like
Scary
that.
that was.
Yeah, and I think that to be seen that being done properly would be great. Something like that. But even I loved Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and bizarrely, I still love, and mine now, my children love the original 1970s, 80s TV series over the film that was made, because there's something about the way it was made that actually makes it very watchable. But yeah, the thing is, the truth of it is, back in those days, there wasn't a lot of visual effects driven stuff because you couldn't afford to do it. There was visual effects in the backgrounds, but it wasn't, the whole thing wasn't driven by it. And I think that's why something like Doctor Who probably is a big one, because sometimes if there was a sort of a really phony looking giant snake or something at the end of a story that was otherwise amazing, it kind of is almost a bit that you're a giant rat or a giant something that doesn't kind of, they'd come up with, because you can imagine back in those days it's the same as we have now, that you'll read the script and go, that they must have been like, oh, how are we going to do that, and of course they deliver what they could. So yeah, I kind of think something like that. A lot of stuff from the BBC stable from the 70s and 80s, I think.
Yeah. And the thing is, I'd say to when you look at those what we'd consider now bad effects, the actors, especially the people playing the Doctor Who, give it so much welly that you kind of believe it. Especially if you're young as well, you're a kid watching it, you just believe it because they're completely committed to this ridiculous thing that's now become, even like a Dalek, it's pretty ridiculous. But now they've managed to, over time, it's become iconic. It's become something that's kind of comes with all this history.
But that's the truth, I think, even now with working on big budget movies as I do now. If the actors didn't help, if they didn't take it seriously, working with somebody like Eddie Redmayne on Fantastic Beasts, and he's an Oscar-winning actor, but he cared about you and cared about how everything that we were doing, the creature work and everything, how is it going to work, what would they be doing, so that you'd utterly believe, the process we came up with on Beasts, and I've used ever since, was we used puppeteers and puppets to play the creatures, so they had a performance, so the actors had a performance to play against. And I think it's that now, that I always say now, it doesn't matter how good we make our work look, if the actor's not touching the thing correctly, looking at it correctly, or not really taking it, then it doesn't matter. The shot doesn't work, So I think that's a big thing to get still now, to get sort of the actors and everybody on board with what we're doing, because ultimately it's trust. You really, really have to trust that we're going to deliver and not make them look daft, basically, when we see the finished result.
Yeah, definitely. We talked about skills you might need studying at uni to become a visual effects artist. What personal attributes do you need? What sort of person do you need to be to get into visual effects?
I think, again, visual effect, to do something like my job, I think you have to be able to deal with people. You have to be collaboration with other people, and always sometimes not very nice collaborate. You have to be able to my experience that I think over the last 14 years or so of being sort of production side on things is just becoming more confident in being more confident in your own ideas, and that's tough, I think, because you're often in a room with people who've got years of experience, decades of experience. But I think that's a massive thing for what for what I do. But if you're an artist doing modeling or something like that, the great thing is to be massively good at that, and it doesn't matter about that sort of. I mean, you're always going to have to interact with other people, and visual effects has always been a collaborative thing. But we, lots of different people will different characters, and people who are more sort of nervous or a little, are absolutely, because they'll be an amazing artist, and that's what you're after. You're not after them to be leading a team of people, and that's where I guess people like me have gone that supervision route, because a lot of the job is that, as well as having the sort of tech and creative stuff. Is a lot of it is leading a team. So, but yeah, I don't think you. I mean, the biggest thing that I say, even to senior people, supervisors and everything at Framestore, is just watch films, watch and love movies. That's one of the biggest attributes, because a lot of what we do is looking at, you're just looking at other films. You're looking at other people's work. You're doing that all the time. It's like you're not copying, but you're absorbing. We're part of a rich tapestry of like over 100 years worth of cinema, and we're filmmakers. We're not, and I think that's the big leap with visual effects, is that, and it's slowly happening, even though in very recent times there's been a lot of press of trying to pretend visual effects isn't happening. But you're filmmakers. You're not technicians. You're, and I think that's really important, just to love what you do. That's the biggest thing.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you'd like to hear from more industry professionals, how they got into the business and how you can do the same, or you just want to listen to some cool stories from movie sets around the world, then please do subscribe to the Honest Filmmaker podcast.